Rebecca Huff, Brandy Hooling, Dejanay Clark Jackson. Good morning. Carolyn Jurish, Latrice LaCour, Ashley Reynolds. Oh, sorry, Ashley McReynolds. Thank you. Angela Miles, Dr. Donna Reno, Julia Tanner, Michael Thompson, Jessica White, Aveda Willis, Rebecca Beard. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to the next agenda item. We do not have, yeah, we do not have a. So we don't have quorum. A meeting without our quorum of our membership won't constitute a meeting in which we can conduct business or make motions. I do expect that we may have some who join us. They may just be running late. I will say traffic was not typical of summer traffic this morning for me either. But we will go ahead and present the information as outlined in our agenda, and we can also accept public comment. But if we get quorum, we'll go back into being able to conduct business or make motions. All right, great. So we can proceed with the agenda now, Christine. Okay. Approval of minutes for the meeting held on March 26, 2025. So you have those. We printed those, and you also have them linked in the slides. We won't take any motions. We don't need any approval at this point without a quorum. So if we have no further comment, do we have any public comment on our minutes from the last meeting? Okay. All right, for the next agenda item, new business, revisions to bulletins in response to the 2025 regular legislative session. Great. I'll start us on this item. Before I do that, Christine and Simone, I do want to take a minute and recognize we have some of our summer interns who are here with us at the department interested in various fields, and we're excited to have them. We get them every summer. They certainly add value to our agency, and we certainly hope that that they get to add some sort of value to their resume and their professional growth as well. So I certainly want to give a warm welcome to all of our interns as they kind of get to watch how a public policy guidance type meeting happens. And so I'm really excited they're here. Also want to recognize Liam. I know Julia's not here. Many of you attended the Disability Awareness Day. It was a wonderful, wonderful event, Liam. It was very well done. Lots of vendors, lots of resources there for parents to come. Dejanay, we had a Literacy Awareness Day as well. I know there are lots of things that happen. We saw a lot of faces across the street throughout session. And it was really, really invigorating. We had Teacher Leader Summit last week. 7,000 leaders and educators joined us last week for an amazing, many of you around this table were there. It was so great to see everybody there. It was an amazing week, really great sessions. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from all of our participants, and I think all of us left there both exhausted and also extremely, extremely motivated moving forward. Yesterday, I was at the Special Education Advisory. We have an association in Louisiana, SEAP. They're also having their conference this week, so I know Rebecca and a couple of the folks on our panel are also there. Some of them, Alvada, some of them also, Christine, are here with us today, but they are not stopping. For you and for your children, they have not taken a break. They are still engaging in professional learning this summer, and planning for next year. I have some team members that are still there with our special education directors today. I was with them yesterday. It was an extremely, again, just really positive environment. People, and our educators are still motivated and planning for what's coming next, in Louisiana. Our theme at Teacher Leader was writing a new story. Um, we're already writing that story for special education, and you all are a part of that. And it's just really exciting to see our educators and our leaders continuing to do that. And they're so motivated. And I know they're going to do additional amazing things for our children, this year. So, with that, I just wanted to kind of kick us off and kind of tell you all where we've been in the past couple of weeks, what's been going on. It's certainly been a whirlwind. So let's dig into, our first, set of business, which are some policy revisions in response to legislative session, particularly, House Bill 684, which was, what we have called our seclusion and restraint, bill for this year. It does also impact a little bit special education cameras. So we'll kind of go through. So you have a copy of, the final bill. You also have a copy of the draft policy revisions. This particular bill will impact, a couple of different policies, two that we are addressing today. There's a little bit that I'll talk about that we'll do in addition, in our, teacher certification policy and training. But today we really wanted to get in front of you the real heavy changes around this bill for, Bulletin 1706 and Bulletin 741. I'm still recovering, y'all. So I'm going to go through, I pulled out all of the big, pieces for 1706 first relative to seclusion restraint, and then I'll go through, it's a little bit less change in 741 around sped cameras, but on your policy document, because I'm an in order also kind of person, and it's just the way we did it. On that policy document, 741 is first. So skip down to the 1706 language, and that's what I'm gonna cover first. So present statute, this is, 17416, which is the statute that provides relative to the use of seclusion and restraint in response to behavior of our students with exceptionalities. That is the particular bulletin in front of you that has quite a few changes. Current law is reflected in 1706 under a very specific section for seclusion and restraint. Updates in response to House Bill 684 are mostly reflected in 1706. Like I said, there will be a few, that we'll talk about in 741, and there's a little bit we'll have to do, in our certification policy as well, just shortly down the road. So the definition of physical restraint was updated to mean the use of manual restraint techniques that involve physical force applied to restrict the movement of all or part of a person's body. It also clarifies that holding a student for less than 3 consecutive minutes in an hour is not considered physical restraint, and adds that only personnel trained in appropriate techniques may use physical restraint, except when there is not sufficient time. If there is an emergency, there's not a trained personnel, but you're trying to prevent, physical injury or harm, that during that emergency situation and there's not an immediate trained personnel near you, and you need, staff need to intervene to protect children, that's allowed in that emergency. But by and large, trained staff, are those who should be, who can use, the physical restraint. A definition of sensory room was also added and clarifies, in law that sensory rooms, and in our policy revision, that sensory rooms, calming spaces, and timeout spaces are not considered seclusion. The bill also required that a school nurse or a school health designee visit a student who was secluded or physically restrained as soon as possible after that restraint has occurred, and no later than the end of the day. It also required that at the annual IEP meeting that parents are notified of the prohibition of the use of seclusion restraint if the student has a medical or psychological condition that prevents the use of seclusion and restraint. We are going to add that to our parent special education parent handbook that's given annually at the IEP meeting. Um, that will allow our school system leaders and our special education directors that assurance that they're being notified, because it's also in the parent handbook. So we'll be updating. We just updated the parent handbook, and we'll update it again to add this information. So in order to detail out the post-incident reporting protocol based on the new law and our proposed policy, we've outlined those post-incident steps here and in policy. Once an incident of seclusion and restraint occurs, the employee should notify the school administrator right away within the hour. The employee or that administrator is going to call the parent no later than the end of the same day, so they're going to make a phone call. The school nurse is notified, and the school nurse, right, we just covered that, is going to visit the student by the end of the school day. The school administrator is also going to notify the special education director by the end of the day. The principal or the designee and that special education director will review any video or audio footage. And so that was added in this particular bill, knowing that we now also have cameras in classrooms as well. The written report of the incident is due to the school administrator the next day following the incident, and then to the parent the following day. So it goes to the principal, a written report of the incident, to the principal the next day, and then the parent will get that written report the next day. The bill and the draft policy details exactly what must be in that written report. It is very clear. We will also add all of that to our guidance document for school system leaders as well, and really detail that out for them. The bill removed the requirement of documentation of the incident at 15-minute increments to require that students be continuously monitored during seclusion and restraint. So the incident number threshold also lowered from previously 5 incidences to 3 before the IEP team is required to reconvene. Local school systems will need to update their policies. We've covered this with, we've started having these conversations with superintendents, also at the Superintendent's Advisory Council, so that they really know that policies are going to have to be updated. The bill requires by December 1st. The requirement to post their policies to their local websites, all of that remains the same. School systems now will also have to provide the seclusion restraint policy and report the designated seclusion rooms to their local special education advisory council each year when they submit those reports to us by May 31st. And we started announcing that yesterday at the SPED directors meeting to them. And you all know, as bills change, as we make policy change, we will be communicating these things over and over as we start to get ready for the new school year as well. So we're going to include this. Again, next steps will also be including all of this in our guidance document on seclusion and restraint for school systems. And when we collect each year the local special education advisory council reports that we're also giving you today for last year, that we're going to add into our template that we provide for them to use, that request for their number of seclusion and restraint rooms. So we're trying to make it in any way that we can. We're trying to automate it for school systems. So in our processes, trying to build in these new requirements and support them through that. So the bill also details new seclusion restraint training requirements. It requires that education preparation providers include for all teachers instruction regarding crisis prevention programs in general, which will be incorporated into an existing course of study for prep providers. And that's also a piece, that's an additional policy change that will happen through certification. We'll add that to requirements for coursework study. The department does currently have available a free module on the on the consideration of the use of restraint and seclusion as an overview module for all educators, administrators, whomever. That's currently available. And we are also looking at an additional statewide training on behavior de-escalation and techniques to support students and educators in the classroom with supporting behavior as well. So that's something that we're looking at providing statewide in the coming year that will also help us meet this. And it's something that we can provide access to prep providers, some of these modules as well, and they can use that with educators coming through their programming. The bill also authorizes the department, it does not require us, but it authorizes the department to develop a crisis intervention training program specific to those on crisis team or in situations where seclusion and restraint may be used. And we have committed to and ensured that the folks who worked on this bill and worked so very hard, all of the different organizations, some of those representatives sitting around this table, that we are going to provide that statewide this year. And we have a lot of crisis prevention intervention training happening in our school systems, but we really feel like securing a statewide opportunity that we can get more individuals in every school system trained, and really thinking about a train-the-trainer program where we can offer a train-the-trainer model that over the years they can train even more people in their school systems. So we've committed to those who helped author this bill and worked so hard on it that we're going to do that for the upcoming school year as well. And we'll release a lot more information about the trainings that will be at no cost as we roll out so I think of them in sort of a big training, little training way. So there's a set of trainings, right, on behavior de-escalation, classroom techniques to support students who have behavior support needs that all teachers need to know. That's sort of a big overview de-escalation type training. And then there's that smaller training where this law says anybody who's providing or using restraint techniques must be trained. That's that smaller set of training where you're going to get, school systems will use our statewide available training to train their crisis teams on who are those responders that are going to respond, and who are those teachers who have students where we know possibly that these incidents are happening for students just based on their disability. And so we know there's a set of people who need that CPI formal training. And so I wanted to kind of explain it to you in that way because I think it makes it a little bit clearer. There's a set of training for all, and there's a set of training for people who need the crisis prevention intervention and the SEAP techniques. So before I go into 741, I just want to kind of pause, let you go through the 1706 language for just a minute, and then I'll cover the 741 as well. So you have that, it's the policy language one. And so anything that you see with the 3 dots, those were things in policy that were already there. That's not changing. Anything new is underlined. Anything being removed based on the law is struck through and replaced with whatever the new law requires. So it is quite a bit. It looks like quite a bit. But I will say we kind of restructured this a little bit too to make it a lot more clear in terms of how 1706 seclusion and restraint policy flowed. So we go from definitions to the use to specifically how physical restraint is defined and when it should be used, and then what are the restrictions, because there were very clear restrictions that we've talked about. And then what are those post-incident requirements? So when an incident happens, what's required after that incident? What happens with the student? What do adults need to do after that incident? So we very clearly put that in its own section. And then we have the policy and reporting requirement section and the training requirement section. And so we've gotten a little bit of feedback on this, just on how a little bit more clearly and easily the different components of this law are now going to be read in the policy update. So let's go to 741, and then we can have any conversation about the full set of changes that we need to. So 17-1948 currently requires each public school governing authority to install cameras in certain classrooms at the request of the parent. House Bill 684 addressed this particular statute regarding the special education cameras, and HB 684 now requires such installation regardless of a parent request. So the special education cameras will be installed in those classrooms as defined by revised statute, those specific classrooms. And this requirement will go into effect February 1. So we've also started communicating this as well with school system leaders, superintendents, our special education directors, and we'll continue to communicate this as we start the school year as well. There was an additional amendments, during that last week that also added that administrators periodically verify that the cameras are in operation, and if the camera will be out of operation for more than 2 consecutive days, that parents be notified using normal communications, that parents be notified that the camera will be down for a certain period. A practical consideration here that we've talked to school systems for already, even when they disable those cameras during statewide testing, that notification be sent. So there are times where you may not know that something technical has happened and the camera's out, and we're doing periodic checks. But also, if it's an instance, the only one I can think of specifically is for statewide testing, where we are not allowed to record video or audio. And so they have to be turned off during statewide testing, that they're proactively telling parents, hey, during this time, they'll be turned off. At this time, they'll be turned back on. And so we're helping school systems through that too, and communicating with them. So this really, and so 741, if you look at it, so that's the top one. So now you'll go back up to this language to see those updates reflected. And so it's not a lot, but significant in implementation, right? And significant in next steps. So that concludes the major updates to these 2 policies. Like I said, there will be one more that will happen around the training requirement for all teachers. So we have to codify that into policy and start communicating that with our preparation providers, and providing them the resources, the access to modules that they can use with their upcoming students. So I'll stop here and we can answer any questions that you all may have about the draft language in alignment with the bill. And we can take any public comment on this one as well.
Any questions or comments from the board, from the panel?
Good morning. This is a lot. This is a lot of updates. It significantly shifts and changes 1701, and it lengthens it. I love the layout, especially in that definition. I see that there was a lot of thought into really defining especially seclusion rooms. My comment is like any other comment where we update guidance, is that there be some more clear, streamlined communication flow charts. We love those, especially because there's those notification timelines. And so just where parents are really clear on the expectation, and even educators, I mean, because it's such a significant update, that it would benefit to have not just the training on the implementation, but the training on the guidance and how to sort of read this document and interpret it for their implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, because it does change, and there are notifications and timelines that change that parents will need to be aware of as well.
Good morning. So I wanted to ask, will the schools be required to provide the names of the people on the crisis team?
So they are required to have crisis plans. We have told them there are really 2, right? So most school systems have a seclusion and restraint policy, and they also have a crisis plan. So they're going to have to also update their crisis plan to kind of include, based on the law, to also include seclusion and restraint in their crisis prevention planning. Um, the law, Angela, does not say specifically that they have to name in their policy who is on those crisis prevention plannings, but I'm curious, I wonder, I'm not sure if we have any school systems who include, hey, here's our crisis planning team. But certainly at an IEP meeting, I would encourage parents to ask that very question. That's probably why you're asking. That you ask that question to know, like, who's on the team, who may be responding, if my child needs this type of activity, and who will be trained to do this. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think too with the individual schools, their crisis teams are, they evolve and they develop from year to year, and staff changes and training changes. So putting something like names in a policy per se that could change so often would probably not be, very time, responsible. But having that conversation during your IEP meeting, I think that's a great idea of being able to get that information during that time.
I just want to thank you for doing the training, because CPI training is very expensive when you have to do it on your own, and especially when you do the train the trainer. So I very much appreciate that y'all are going to now take that on and provide that for us. So thank you for including that.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to also note, I see a little bit of a discrepancy with the dates, to where, yes, in 1706 now, we're having to do a review of the video footage, but in the 741, necessarily cameras don't have to be in place until February 1st. So how do we kind of streamline that to make sure everybody's on the same page about when is the hard deadline to have this done so that it's all, laid out correctly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know Brenton's here and several others who were, my thought on that is knowing that there are some who already have it. So it says if available. So if we have some school systems that already have those cameras in. And so if an incident happens from August to January 31st, right, and it's in a setting or a classroom where you have the video and the audio, it's my understanding that this bill, the intent here, and even in the policy, you would be reviewing that between August, during that time, if available, right? And then starting in February, because really, but I think if available is the right terminology, because sometimes these incidents are not going to always happen, even once we get the cameras in the classrooms as defined by the law, which really, for sure, are self-contained classrooms. There may be some other settings, but there could be places where you have a student who's involved in a seclusion restraint incident and there is no camera. So even once we get them on February 1, there may not always be audio or video footage, right? So I think that's a good question, though.
I guess to clarify, the cameras are not mandated to be in the seclusion rooms. Exactly. It's going to be mainly the self-contained classroom, right?
Right.
Good morning. I'll also say, just as Meredith said, we were in New Orleans on yesterday with directors across the state, and I can confidently say just about every director has gotten a head start with the process to install the cameras. I know in my school district, we did have cameras installed in some of our classrooms, but I felt as an administrator, in the district, we have the funds, let's just install them in all the classrooms that's required. So we have it well on the way in our district. So, I do feel that those cameras will be installed in the majority by that February 1 because the funding is there, and we're definitely taking advantage of that so that we're not pressed with that deadline when it comes, because things happen when you're dealing with vendors and you're making these large purchases and things like that. I also want to say that sometimes a child may have to be restrained and there is not a camera in viewing. So this doesn't always happen in a classroom. So I just want us to keep that in mind too.
Yeah, I would say that was our purpose of the if applicable kind of language there, because we understand it could happen in a restroom, it could happen in a hallway, maybe that doesn't have a camera. And as far as the date for the February, that was very a methodical decision, kind of understanding some of the other districts of how long it has taken them to get cameras. Some were able to get it up very quickly. Some, I think we had like 6 months it took them to get the cameras installed. So we wanted to give some leeway there. And obviously you can't review footage that isn't available if there's not a camera. But the expectation is by that deadline, I'm happy to hear some are jumping on it to make sure we're not at last minute. Because by that deadline, it should be done. Not only advocates have been really sounding the alarms about this sort of delay in getting these cameras, there are numerous, and I mean numerous legislators that are really aggravated with districts that have been denying parents' requests, that have just not put anything up or has had delays. And so this is something that actually made it in there because that was, we intended to have it in there, but there was actually a legislator that helped us with this that said it has to be in there. If you want me to speak to this, that has to be addressed because they get tired of hearing about it every single year. So we're very happy that that was able to get in there as well.
Any other comments?
Yes, I was gonna ask, will the parents still be able to request to see the footage of videos in the classrooms?
Yes. So none of that. So again, right. So all of the places where you see like ... Nikki's going to laugh at me. That's stuff that was already in policy that's staying. So we didn't change any of that. Really, the only thing here that changes in policy is that we took out everything where the parent requests the cameras because you don't have to anymore. But all of the pieces about how you request that will still remain in that local, the local school system policy for how a parent would go about requesting that to see or view any footage from a school system. And then we added that the number of designated seclusion rooms that goes to in the SEAP report now. But yes, so Angela, that still is there. That still remains.
Question. So earlier, there's going to be a training for districts through the department by the use of CPI?
We are going to secure statewide CPI training for school systems. And we're gonna do a train the trainer model to where we're thinking about like a small, medium, large, and how we can individualize, okay, a small school system may not need as many, but a middle-sized school system and a large school system will need quite a few trained. And so we'll work with y'all on that. And then really also need to do a little bit of a self-assessment with school systems to see how many do you already have trained, and how many can we support additionally.
Okay,
So we'll
and
be
the
working
reason for
with
my
y'all.
question is because some school districts use other types and not CPI. So what would that look like if the overall training for districts will be CPI? For example, we're a district that uses Handle with Care.
Yeah. So we wouldn't want to duplicate any funding or spending by any means, Alvada. So like if you all tell me, hey, I've got Handle with Care training and that's our trained people and then we would be fine with that. But what we promised to do was to offer a statewide, and most of our districts, I know some use Handle with Care, most use CPI. So monetarily, that makes most sense for us, and to be good stewards of our state IDA money is to say, okay, we can provide that and see how many more we can add for school systems. But if you're using Handle with Care, you've got your people trained, that could be fine. And we can think about in the future too, is there something funding wise that we can help with districts who use Handle with Care and want to use another prominent trainer? We might can do something on that, along that lines. You got it.
I would add, there's some training requirements in there, right? So as long as your district is
Yeah.
meeting those requirements, you can continue to use that particular training. But if you're not, then you would have to consider something else. Because I think part of that was we wanted to make sure there was sort of a standardized training across the board. You have a lot of teachers that might switch districts, move elsewhere. And so we wanted to make sure that that sort of training that they may have received would be consistent, and not having so many folks training on so many different aspects of things that they might not be able to move into their new role with the knowledge that we were hoping to give them through these particular types of training.
So was the purpose of that training to be a one and done kind of situation, or a renewal ever so often in the vision of the training itself?
I think the purpose was for a renewal of those particular folks that are identified as your crisis intervention team. So as part of the certification process, that was kind of the one and done. You get that through your certification process. And then whenever you are a part of this crisis intervention team, you should have updated training. Because again, you're the responder, right? We understand at times you might not be there to respond, so someone steps in, but I'm hoping that you were on your little walkie-talkie running down the hallway to get to that situation, and you're not just letting someone that isn't trained just handle it. But that is the intent. So those folks that are the responders would receive ongoing training.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a question. In terms of opting out of seclusion, does a parent need to provide a doctor's note to be able to do that?
Yes, so Liam, that was part of, that was added into policy, and it very specifically defines the physicians who can provide that doctor's note. That's also something that that the law now requires us to put in that parent handbook and basically notify parents that this is an option, that if your child has a medical or a mental or a behavioral reason as to why they should not be secluded and or restrained, there's a very specific component in here that talks about the physician's note for that, and that we must notify parents annually of that option. And so we'll have that in the handbook.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments from the panel? Any public comments?
Okay. Let's see, what's quorum look like? We don't have quorum yet. If we come to quorum, we needed one more. That's okay. If we come back in it after, if you all wish to make an endorsement, we will be bringing this to August Bessie, but we can also report to Bessie that that there were no suggested revisions or concerns in that way from panel members who were here. We appreciate y'all. All right.
All right.
I think the expectation is very clear.
It is. It's very helpful. Yeah, it is. I agree. Okay. All right, so for the next section, we're going to talk about the informal reports. First would be the Local Special Education Advisory Council reports.
Okay, y'all, this is really just something that I bring to y'all this time of year every year. I don't have a whole lot of slides or discussion on my end. You all know that pursuant to revised statute 17944, we collect local school systems special education advisory council reports here at the agency. We create the document that you have before you. It is also now publicly posted. When we uploaded our documents, we were still finalizing and still getting everything publicly posted right before Summit. So I don't have the link for you in your slides, so we printed it, but it is live and posted public on our website now. So the legislation also requires that this report is posted annual on local school systems websites. That's why you see us posting and providing in our report where it's posted locally, so that you all don't get hundreds and hundreds of pages of local reports. So please feel free to share this with your stakeholders, with stakeholders, with parents who are very interested in, what happened in 2024, 2025 on their local Special Education Advisory Council. So this one really is just for your information.
Any comments?
I have a question. Much like many of the required reportings, oftentimes they just sit, and then there's no consequence for non-compliance. So my question is, according to this report, not every school district has uploaded their report to their website because there's no link provided. So what's the consequence, if any, to those districts or support needs that are offered by the state? And then two, are there any opportunities for the state to review these to provide feedback? Obviously, it's a lot of reports.
Yes.
Or to the opposite, the district can request feedback on, because they vary widely.
They
Well, I
do.
can pull up one district's report and it is super thorough, it's organized, it's synthesized, and I can pull up another one and it's very skeleton.
Yes. So if y'all remember, one of the things that we did together was create a template. You guys asked if we would provide a template. We kind of worked together. We brought y'all some ideas. We came up with a really good template. I've already changed it for next year to add the seclusion restraint rooms, that reporting piece to the report. So we do provide it to our special education directors to use. Those sitting around this table can also tell you that this year, I actually did pull a couple of them up as we were collecting, and just kind of talked about models and talked about, okay, hey, this one has everything that the law requires, because there are a couple of required items. So when this legislation first came into play, the legislation was pretty vague. It just said, you need to provide a report of your activities. Then it came back a year or so ago and said, we want a report on student with disabilities, academic performance, funding. Y'all are going to call me out. There's one more. Any noncompliance. So those three were in there. Now we've got this fourth piece of, now you have to report your seclusion restraint. And so I do think the template was a wonderful idea. It has given them something to go from. What are the things that they should share with their with the public? You guys also made some suggestions that we used, and we put in there at the end of the report, like, tell your stakeholders how to get on your council, right? How do they apply for your council? And so many of them are doing that. I think, Dejanay, at the end of the day, it's a guidance and it's a template that the law doesn't require them to use, but I do think a lot of them are using it. And we're just going to have to stay diligent and reminders. What we do know is there are a couple on here that, as we did reach out over and over and over to everyone on the list. And what we did find, now some of these on here, they're on the list. Some are new charters. Who, indicated, hey, we're brand new. We just opened this year. We'll have one up by next year. So we did send communication to all of these folks saying, hey, you're required to have one by law. Make sure you have one going for next year. So I think, we can continue that consistent communication. I also recommend to parents, reaching out and saying, hey, how can I help? How can I help form one? At my local charter. So we'll continue to be as diligent and picking at them as we can to try to get them in. I think we got more this year than, I feel like every year we get more and more. And so we fill the cells a little bit more and more. We've got all districts. There are a few charters on here that we don't have.
I will say to you, Meredith, the support and the reminders. We received many. And not only the reminders, but what else do you need? So we were given what we needed to get this done.
And I think too, just having that open communication, like we do usually on our calls of good examples of what these reports, look like. What is a good example, a solid example? That I think is very helpful to districts to help them better understand what is the expectation. We're always trying to raise the bar. So that is a beneficial component, but it's also a work in progress. So.
And I'll say that directors really do collaborate around this work to support each other. So there's a good networking going on to make sure these reports are getting in, and I do feel they're getting better and better as the years go.
Well, and just like the change, it's a small one, report your number of seclusion restraint rooms, but we have a lot of responsibility too to communicate, right? So we have updates to statute, to laws, to policy, and we know as an agency we have to communicate and communicate, add it to templates. How can I help support them in getting what's required done? And so we'll certainly continue to do that.
Any other questions or comments on this?
I do have a couple. I know with our council, whenever we are monitoring certain programs, we give them an opportunity not only to submit whatever the report is, but if there is something that is missing, for instance, maybe there was an explanation from a charter school that said, hey, we're new, we couldn't provide it. I think that's helpful information to have included in your reporting here, so you may understand why they didn't submit that particular report, as the law says. At our council, we're big on trying to hold folks accountable. So a lot of times what we do is we send letters where you're going to get a letter. I don't know if it would be from this body or from the department or from Bessie, whomever, that basically says, this is the law. You're supposed to submit this. You did not. Please tell us why, and make that available either on the report, make the letter available through one of these meetings about sort of why didn't you do this? Because if no one is holding them accountable, then what's the purpose of doing it? There's nothing on here that says, or I haven't heard anything of what happens to these folks. Do they just never do it? Is this year just going to be missed and we'll just get it again next year? I don't think that's an acceptable, like for the charter that's new, I don't think it's acceptable to say, we'll get it next year. No, you're going to do this one this year. It might be late, but you need to do it. So I think y'all should get more information about that as far as maybe the why. That might be helpful, because maybe, I don't know what they would be. Maybe there are valid reasons for not submitting that report. But it'll also help you identify trends. Maybe some of I'm not certain, but at least the ones I'm looking at, it seems to be all charters. So maybe there is a trend. I don't know. I'm just proxying. But it would be helpful for this body and others who are looking at these reports to understand why someone is not submitting this report. Because fact of the matter is, these SEACs, we're hoping, are holding their districts accountable for special education matters within that district. And based on my experience, I think districts are going to be more likely to listen to those SEACs, hopefully, than some of our state level folks. And so I'd like to see some sort of documentation there about how they're held accountable. What is their reason or excuse, whether valid or not? I think that would be helpful to include in your documentation.
Okay. Is there a requirement for the local council to provide accurate information on a website? Like with the minutes and election dates, is there a requirement for that?
So I would have to go back to the specific statute and read the whole thing to 1944. I don't recall there being, Angela, like a requirement for them to post their minutes or post their application for membership, those kind of things. I don't think all of that is spelled out. What is spelled out is requirements for their membership, how many times they have to meet a year, and the requirement to submit the report. And now there are now 4 requirements that have to be in that report, and they're required to post that on their website.
Any other questions or comments from the panel? Any public comments? All right, let's go to our next item of next steps. We do, excuse me. SPPAPR update for 2025-2026 school year. Oh, sorry, planning.
Okay, and I kind of expected that this particular item, in addition to the policy item we did first, that this one would kind of generate more conversation and we have more time. So I'm glad that we've left ourselves plenty of time here to talk about this particular item. So this agenda item is going to focus on our state performance plan, annual performance report update from this past year, and really lead into, I think, the most important part of this, after we talk about some of the data, talk about where we've come this year, what we've accomplished, really thinking about and leaning into the planning piece for 2025, 2026. Y'all know I come to you every summer and ask you, what is it that you really want us to focus in on next year? What are some supports that we can do? And I have a feeling like just knowing even our first item for today, right? We know there's some guidance training pieces around seclusion and restraint that I know is based on our community, based on our stakeholders, is a priority for us going into the next school year. But as I go through this and talk through some of our data, really want you kind of thinking throughout this, what are some things that I really think can propel our state forward and improve outcomes for our students? So let's dig in a little bit. So IDEA requires every state to have a state performance plan. That plan describes and evaluates our efforts toward the requirements and implementation of IDEA. It has our 18 targets. When I first came on board in 2021, some of you were on that panel then, we set our current state plan, our current targets were set alongside this panel. There are now 18. So OSIP can also change those on us anytime at any point that they want. And so this past year was the first year that we had 18. We've typically had 17. So they added an indicator last year. They are a mix of student outcomes as well as compliance, and we'll talk a bit more about those. This is the first year, like I said, we have 18. The one that they added was a compliance target. It's a very interesting target because it really pulls in information from other targets. Okay, a little bit duplicative, but we do the requirements piece. So indicator 18 pulled in from other compliance targets throughout the SPP, our state plan. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then each year we submit, like there aren't enough acronyms in the education world, we submit an APR, an annual performance report, that is a report toward all of those 18 targets in our plan. How have we done as a state? And so it's a reflection of the progress toward meeting those goals, meeting those targets that we set together 4 years ago. It consists of targets for each of the 18 indicators. What was our data? What was the performance for each of those? Some of that data is automatically pulled in from, really, this is a year-long process. We're submitting data constantly to the U.S. Department of Ed and OSIP, and they pull that data in to our annual performance report in a system. So everything is very much connected. We are constantly reporting on this data. If we slip backwards, you'll see this terminology of slippage. That means that we fell back. We didn't make any progress for whatever reason on that particular target. We went backwards a little bit. And if that happens on any targets, we as a state, we are constantly together. Our data team is right back here. They're amazing. And we also work with our AAA and our assessment team, and we meet constantly. And we are talking about this data, analyzing this data, and we have to come up with, if there is slippage, if there are places where we go back, we have to come up with what we call slippage statements, and where we have looked and analyzed that data and we try to say, okay, what's causing this, right? Um, and so I will say, and I will say this while they are all in this room, and you all will see it in your handouts, we submitted the best state performance plan, annual performance report towards those targets this February than we have ever submitted since I've been in this role. Really, really incredible. Incredible results that our kids are seeing, that our educators and leaders are leading through in their school systems. I know last meeting, we really celebrated together the national NAEP data for students with disabilities. Our students with disabilities are both outgrowing and outperforming nationally all other students with disabilities. 49 other states in our country are reporting declines in performance for kids with disabilities, except in one place, here. That's your work. It gives me chills. That's your work. That's our supervisors, our administrators, our educators. We are not finished. We have a long way to go. We still have improvements, but we are doing amazing work. You are doing amazing work. Our parents, our stakeholders, all of the change that I think about, policy shifts that have impacted this work, that have come from this body, from stakeholders, and from our educators. It is incredible. It is incredible. The results for all kids in Louisiana are outstanding. But when you think about being the only one in the country that is showing growth for kids who need us the most and who present with the most support needs and the most challenges, it's just really incredible. And so we submitted the best APR that we've ever submitted. We will get our determinations by the end of this week. Yes, I wanted them before this meeting. Yes, I have been bugging I have a state lead at the federal level. And please, 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 no, they're not going to give it to us early. If the date was June 20th, that's the date. And so we will get the results of our APR. I am very hopeful because of the results that we're seeing and the performance that we're seeing. You all have a handout that goes a little bit more detail because I wanted to show you last year at this time, we showed you the progress toward each target. And this time I added some pages. I know it's more trees, but I wanted you to see the year to year. And I wanted you to see it in color, to see the blue and the green. So we like teal at the department. That's our color scheme. But in APR world, the more green you have, the better. You don't want red. I don't want to not meet a target or decline in a target. We submitted an APR with more green. I know that sounds so simplistic, but we submitted an APR with more green than we have ever seen. And so you'll see that on that handout. So we're currently in our 5-year cycle with our targets. It sets our targets for 18 years, compliance and student outcome. And I'm going to skip forward to the actual results. So I pulled out onto a slide some of these indicator results, and then you have all 18 on your handout. And you have where did we measure up to on this year's target. And remember, we're looking at data, so the report that we submitted February 1 is looking at data from 23-24, right? Because we don't even have our 24-25 data in yet, our performance data, our state LEAP and LEAP Connect data. So the data is a year lag. Y'all, I can't even imagine. I mean, we know that we're going to see even better results on the report that we're going to submit in February. I don't know if my team would agree, but I'm excited to submit that report, right? Because it's going to show additional growth that you all are impacting. So I'll start with some of the performance indicators. As you know, our LEAP 2024 results showed, again, statewide, our students with disabilities grew in percent mastery again for the third year in a row. Our educators, our general educators, special educators, our support staff, administrative, our parents, our community support partners who are around this table, and I've shared this with DD Council and others, I am singing your praises everywhere that I can because you deserve it. And so this particular federally reported performance data shows, again, additional improvements in ELA and in math. There are some of these that we didn't necessarily meet the target. Some of them, like fourth grade ELA on NAEP nationally, we grew 13 points, whereas across the country in fourth grade, all other states declined 4. So this is a different measure. This is our state LEAP assessment. A decline of 0.42% for that particular grade, ELA, fourth grade. Really statistically not super significant. We didn't fall a ton. This particular grade level, we didn't increase a ton in mastery. But again, we're getting there, right? 8th grade ELA, we grew. We grew in fourth grade math. 8th grade really rocked it last year in mastery for our kids with disabilities. High school changed, insignificant, down just a little bit. So none of these required what I call a slippage statement. So they basically indicated that we kind of maintained or grew in certain areas. They did not require us to report on or to explain any significant losses here for our students with disabilities. So really, really incredible. We also have an indicator. You can see that on your handout. Let me point you to it. That is specifically for our students who are on alternate assessment. So these are our students with significant disabilities assessed with LEAP Connect. And you will see that is indicator 3C. And you can see for some of those, we're very, very close to the target. Some of them, we actually met the target. So we're seeing increases for our students who are assessed on LEAP Connect as well. And actually some of those grade levels and subjects, we're meeting some of our state targets. So I also wanted to pull out this particular data set. These point to high school outcomes and post-school transition data. So our goal is for the vast majority of our students with disabilities graduating with a regular high school diploma, having a plan for the day after high school. We've talked a lot about transition and post-secondary outcomes on this particular panel. So you can see that first indicator, our students with disabilities graduating with a regular high school diploma increased 4.69%, right? And I truly, truly believe that all of these indicators, if you listen to my team, when they present this and they present this data to leaders and educators across the state, they talk about taking a child on a journey through these indicators and through this required data that we collect. We collect a lot of data, but it's for a purpose, and it should tell us a story about students in Louisiana. And so all of these things are connected, and we truly believe the more proficient students that we are generating and that we're supporting, and we're getting on grade level in reading, and we're getting on grade level in math, that by the time they get to middle and high school, these outcomes, that's why we're going to see our students who are graduating with a regular diploma, we're going to see that just increasing because they're coming to high school better ready to engage. I think we have done a lot in our state to just raise expectations for these students. I truly believe that our kids can learn to read, our kids can learn to do math, do numeracy, and we can change their life day after high school. So that's really incredible. So in addition to their state performance, their NAEP performance, we're seeing high school graduation rates go up for our kids, which is where we want to go. You see the next three pieces really talk about, so the first one is our graduation target. We also have a dropout target, right, tied to that. So you'll see if you look on this sheet, our dropout target is indicator 2. And if you look on the year to year, our dropouts, obviously graduations are going up, our dropout is going down. That's you want to see dropouts going down, graduates going up. The next three indicators on this slide are really about post-secondary outcomes. And so we went up slightly, not super significantly, statistically significant, but we're seeing enrolled in higher ed kind of stay the same, go up slightly, which we want to see that go up even more. I know a lot of you around this table have done a lot of work with Post-Secondary Inclusive Alliance even for our kids with significant disabilities, getting them experiences on a college campus is incredible and opens up opportunities for them. So we're seeing so many more of those pop up around our state too, which can help this target and helps their outcomes and their experiences. So you also see enrolled in higher ed, the percent of students enrolled in higher ed or competitively employed. Year to year, we're seeing that we had seen a transition upward. This is, again, statistically less than 1%. So kind of the same, just a tad bit decline there. And then higher ed, post-secondary ed, or a training program, or competitively employed. So it adds a few more options for kids in that particular indicator. And based on that survey data, 100% of our kids had some sort of option that we surveyed. Maybe they didn't go to higher ed, or they didn't go to some sort of training program, but instead they received some sort of competitive employment. And so, again, that's based on a survey of our students who have exited us in that year prior to when we submit this. So still, I think a lot of work to do here, but certainly some bright spots with additional students receiving high school diplomas as well. So I want to pause here and give us a good bit of time to really talk about considering all of the pillars that we've talked about that stand up our work, whether it's supporting high quality teaching and learning and instruction for our kids, whether it's providing additional trainings, building the capacity of our leaders, our educators, how do we better engage with our stakeholders, how do we ensure program compliance. So I want to point out on the handout that you have, there are quite a few compliance indicators that you all are probably very interested in as well. So a lot of our educational environment, which is indicator 5, so how many of our students are in regular education settings the majority of the day, those are going up. We're very close to that target in 5A. We also have, if you look at 4A, so suspensions and expulsions, we have fewer students, and look, we're offering a lot of behavior support. Some of this is tied to our seclusion restraint conversation we just had around de-escalation. But I do want to point out that we've got fewer students who are being suspended and expelled, who are students with disabilities. That target is in green, right? So we met that one. Our target was to be at or less than 12.5. We're at just over 9% of our students who are being suspended or expelled greater than 10 days. So that target we actually met, and that's a compliance target. Our preschool outcomes, which is our TS Gold data, we saw increases there. And I know we're doing a lot more work with our teaching and learning team and the early childhood team and supporting those spaces and supporting high quality teaching and learning, high quality instructional materials, And we had a lot of teacher leader sessions as well, that were designed around learning and supporting some of our youngest learners with disabilities. Our child find indicator, indicator 11, which is how many of our students with disabilities evaluations are happening on time within the 60-day timeline. And these directors around this table can tell you that we are on it. So performance means a lot. Compliance is a foundation in special education and also means a lot. And so we are, if you look at the year to year for indicator 11, that percentage went up. And we're at just over 99% compliant with those evaluations happening within the timelines. Same thing for our early childhood transition, which is indicator 12, very, very close. So our compliance indicators, those targets were set for us. They're either at 0%, something they want no students or adults doing, or they're at 100%, something that they want you doing for all students. And so these particular ones around our evaluations happening on time, of course, the target for that is at 100%. So you'll see that for the compliance ones, they're either at 0 or absolute 100, right? So again, just wanted to point out some of the other bright spots that I didn't pull out. Again, just really, really incredible data that we submitted. And I think a lot of that work goes to conversations that we've had here, policy revisions that have happened right here around this table, a lot of hard work in our school systems and with our parents as well. So I want to pause here and just open up for discussion with our panel if we have any public comments around considering the importance. What are the pillars that really stand up and allow us to administer special education in a state? And when you think about our state performance plan, our data, when you think about conversations that you're having with other parents, with other educators, what are the focus areas for our panel that you would like for us to consider or think about as we go into the next school year? Of course, anything in addition to what we've kind of talked about here as well.
I have a comment question, and this is my favorite time of the year to dig into the numbers. You mentioned survey data. Which of the indicators come from surveys? That would be helpful, because I think you answered one of my questions, particularly with the post-school outcome.
Survey data. Look, Ashley's telling me it's the preschool outcome survey. Which ones? Tell me. She knows them. Sorry. 8 and 14, right, Ashley?
8 and 14. Thank you, Ashley. So with the post-school outcomes, just so that I'm clear, because my question was trying to tie that data set into the graduation data point. So those don't coincide because that comes from only those surveyed versus the school's data. So
Right.
It's not of the 65% graduated,
Correct.
100%. Got
We
it.
like
Thank
we
you.
did not get every single graduate or their family to answer that survey. Correct.
Okay, I'm going to go back up to indicator 3. So we're talking proficiency, which is mastery,
Yes.
for the indicator 3. I'm looking specifically at 3B reading, of course.
Right.
I vaguely remember asking this before, and I think this question lingers because it matters.
Yep.
Is there a breakdown, and it's not just for the reading data, it's for all of the academic data. Is there a breakdown of exceptionalities for each of those performance indicators? Here's why I ask, because if I'm looking at 3B for 4th grade reading, it's showing me that only 16% of our students with IEPs are performing proficiently, i.e. mastery,
Mhm.
but is that of the 98% participation? And of the 98% that participated in the assessment, what are their exceptionalities? We know this is not significant. I would imagine we're not talking about significant cognitive disabilities,
Correct.
or maybe we are. I assume not
Not in
because
this
we have
number.
alternative assessment.
That's right.
Right,
So
so-
they're in 3C.
Yeah.
3B are your students with disabilities taking LEAP.
So that's the biggest thing that stand out.
Mhm.
I am, like most of the state, am championing all of our growth.
Yep.
But I can't ignore how incremental we are, and we know we're not where we need to be, and we can't make a plan really unless we can dig in and answer some of those questions, because we can target
Mhm.
a plan specific to how we can move those students. But this, I think, doesn't give enough information. So I was really curious about where those students, where they sort of fall and how we can support.
Yeah, we can check to see if there's any way that we can get a by disability mastery breakdown. I will say, just knowing our students, the vast majority of these students are specific learning disability.
And even breaking that down more, we have subgroups. So
Yes.
SLD what will help
Mhm.
target supports best. Also aligned to 3D, when we talk about the gap, that gap is from which of the lowest indicator, or which of the levels to proficiency? So is it unsat to proficiency, approaching basic to proficiency? What is that gap measured as?
So this particular gap, Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong. So 3D, they actually also pull our students without disabilities. What's their proficient rate? What's the gap between proficiency for students with disabilities and students without disabilities? And how are we working to close that gap?
Gotcha. So the students, we used to have that number somewhere. There was a report, I remember that being provided, of where those non-disabled students fell on proficiency. That makes sense.
And look, y'all, so we will get results for our determination by the end of the week. We will then post, and you will be able to see the numbers that generate this data. What's the numerator? What's the denominator? That is that will be really helpful, Dejanay, too, to actually dig into once the report goes public and you get the actual numbers that generated these percentages, right, that we pull out for ease on the eyes, and you can really dig into what are the numerators, denominators, what are the actuals, what's the raw data say. So I think that could be helpful, and I could send that to y'all too once it posts publicly.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that gap, because I was like, I don't know why that didn't resonate with me. And then maybe it's the language in the indicator explanation, the glossary.
Mhm.
It says that it's the proficiency rates for children with IEPs in those grade bands and all students. So are those students with IEPs also lumped into that? Because it said all students, not and non-disabled students, or students without IEPs. I think that's also where my confusion was. So if there's any
Gotcha.
opportunity for language clarity, that would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's students with IEPs, and then it doesn't say all other students, but all other students without IEPs. And what is that proficiency gap? How are your kids with disabilities performing versus their non-disabled peers? And why aren't they performing on grade level at a similar or very close rate? That's the intent of 3D. Is kind of, it's been explained to us by OSIP. That one actually is, I still consider it relatively new. I think we've had the proficiency 3D. They broke indicator 3 up a couple of years ago. And we've had 3D, I think, in place for a couple of years now. But that was something that they got really interested in at a national level was how do you have students without disabilities performing at one place, and how do we start to close those gaps and get our students who have IEPs, our students with disabilities, performing at a similar rate. And so the idea there is you're closing that gap. So for 3D, look, it gets so complex, and there are some that you want to see the indicator, you want to see the number go up, and there are some where you want to see the number go down.
Right, I was gonna say that same thing. This is the area where we wanna see that number shrinking.
Yes. Yes.
And that the
Yes.
change is the higher number.
Yeah, yeah. And so you'll see, and this is why we pulled out the year to year. So go look at page 7 for 3D on 4th grade, the first 3D row. You'll see in FFY 22, our proficiency gap was at 27%. We've reduced that gap by 2.32%. Right? And so it all aligns, it all talks to each other. So when you look at that, and NAEP is a different measure, but we saw that happen on NAEP, we're seeing that happen on our state results. And so we're absolutely closing that proficiency gap, which is incredible. Not fast enough, and not fast enough for us, I don't think, or fast enough as far as the expectation from the U.S. Department of Education. But I think, you know, we're really the only state that's answering that call, but we want to do it faster. And I agree with you, Dejane, the more we really dig in and dissect, and we know, you know, exactly which students and exactly which areas, we can better put in some additional targeted support.
Meredith, I have one last question.
Yeah.
It was brought to the panel, the federal funding request or
Yes.
grant.
Yep.
That had some targets. So how will that work with, now that we have these results, how do those go together?
Yeah, so like we sort of decided on, so with our IDA application, we bucket those funds into sort of those high leverage or high level areas that are required on our IDA budget. So for example, one of those is building the capacity of educators. So there's a lot of flexibility in that, in what you spend your money on in terms of professional development, in terms of training. So, you know, all of the things that we talked about when we talked about that particular application and budget, we are doing. If there's any flexibility, we can do any additional supports. Also, our salaries are in that budget. And if there's anything here that you say, hey, we want additional guide, that's on us. So there may be some things that we can do additionally through our team, capacity building efforts that won't necessarily impact or cost us more money, but what is the will of the panel, right? Like, what do we want to really focus in on? And if there's flexibilities in the budget for us to do things additional things that we've talked, that above and beyond what we talked about around the budget, then we have the flexibility to add those in those categories and do some additional things this year with our funding. And we kind of worked in, we knew and were listening to around the seclusion restraint piece, and so we kind of talked, and that piece we've already got in our budget for IDA, so we'll be able to cover those things that we talked about earlier for sure. Good question.
I have a question about indicator 8 with parent involvement. Like, what are the components of that? And then also, like, I just kind of wanted to add on there, I kind of feel like the revisions made to the parent handbook, or the parent handbook that gonna go, you know, at IEP meetings. I feel like because of those revisions that were made and like the language being more clear and just an updated version, because they get the same one every year, and I
Yes.
just kind of not,
Yeah.
anyhow.
Get another
I
one.
feel like that is going to increase the parent involvement here, but what are the components of it? Like, what is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Yeah, no, it's a great question. And this survey is currently open for our participants. So several years ago, um, we created actually, when this was way before us, we reset the target 4 years ago, but the plan for how we collect this parent involvement, so it's done with a survey, and we worked with um, predecessors, not we, worked with our analytics and data team to, for the next 5 years, create and select which districts, which charters every year that we could get a representative sample of our state student population. So every year there's a set of districts and charters who are selected to count in this particular survey. Now, we also provide it statewide. Any parent can answer the survey. But the ones who have the specific codes that we sent out, the specific instructions, those are the ones who are counted in this particular survey. We can't change that methodology without coming to you all for any sort of approval on that. So our state plan says that we take a representative sample every year based on our state plan that we have to submit to OSEP, and say, here's how we chose the selected districts. Now, the struggle here, when you dig into our APR, we work every year on the response rate. How do we get more and more? They might be able to rattle off the number. We can increase the number of parents who are responding from that responsive set of school districts. It is a struggle. We send that out. We send the letters. They do have to log in with a secure code. So there's a couple of steps for parents. They get a letter saying, hey, you've been selected to participate in this survey. One of the things that, and y'all may have some additional ideas, that we talked with school districts about and SPED directors about this year was, hey, before the school, because we launch it before the school year is over, but the end of the school year is so much happening and so chaotic, so many events. But what we told them was, if you have parents coming in, if they're closing out the year, if you've got an IEP meeting coming up that you're closing out the year, planning for the next, or if you do an event for kids, a celebratory ceremony, something, pull that survey out and have your parents take it right there while they're in school. But there's certainly more that we can do around the response rate. But of the ones that we get, you can see 78% of them say, I feel like, so the survey, Rebecca, is asking them, do you feel involved in your school? Do you feel like you have a say in their IEP? Do you feel a part of your school community? Are you brought in to discussions around your child? Do you feel like your IEP is supporting them? How supportive is your school system of you as a parent? And so certainly, we want that number to be even higher, but we also see and know there are also struggles with responsiveness. And so I think if there's certainly things that we are constantly talking about with our team. We're right now, as the survey is open, it'll close, I believe, at the end of July, and we're sending response rates to school systems during the survey saying, hey, this many of your parents have completed. You could use, can you do some additional communication? Can you use social media over the summer? Can you send out another letter? Can you use your communication structure, JCampus, JPAMS, whatever that call, and do a quick text or call with a link to the survey, and how they can access it. So we're increasing the communication around it to increase the response rate, because I want to get more of those parents. So we already looking at a sampling, and then if we don't get a lot of those parents to respond, how true representative is it of our kids, of our population, and as a statewide picture of how our parents are indicating that special education is serving them. So I hope that helps. But if y'all have any ideas, that's certainly something that we're open to, is how do we increase and how do we better get to parents for surveys.
I'm just going to say that that's truly believe and know that that is going to be the responsibility of districts. Districts have the relationships with parents, and individual schools are going to have to step up. The state can give guidance, but those schools have to build those
Get
relationships.
it to them. Good question.
Any other questions or comments?
I do. I think to that question, what focus areas should the panel consider? I'll say which ones I think are important. If you looked at the first one, because what is the biggest driver? I mean, is the teacher in the classroom. So build the capacity of the teacher in the classroom is one. And I would look at preschool because you're making gains on the preschool side. And if you beef up the preschool training, if you think about preschool teachers, and a lot of times in those preschool classrooms, you know, you don't have a master's degree teacher in early childhood in every single classroom, and enough assistants or, you know, enough hands in those classrooms, especially with our little people. So I would beef up that. I would put training throughout, like high quality preschool training throughout the year, not just in the summer. That the summer teacher leader thing, I'm from a non-public school. Our teachers love it. They love that you invite us. They love that everything there they talk about, they redeliver when we have PD in August. They support each other. You're doing a great thing for all kids, not just our public school kids. And then maybe along with that, because that is so intensive in the summer, and I really don't know what happens throughout the year. But school, you know, the non-public schools don't have access to the district training. But that if there were some layered things throughout the year, like some of those really great people that you had come, if they could come back and be like, whatever part two, and then the people in the room can talk about it and say how it worked in their room, and then maybe we have part three at Mardi Gras or whatever, you know, some kind of layered thing where once the teacher gets in the classroom and she's practiced it a bit, she can come back to it. So
I love that. And they're not in the room, but I'll give a shout out to our early childhood team and our young children with disabilities coordinator just worked with all of our school systems at the end of the year and provided them with some of our state 619 funds, some additional sensory materials for kids. So it was really cool to see us help support them with actual materials and just different sensory supports that some of those kids can need in the classroom, and we were able to provide that with some of our funding and give back straight into the classroom some materials. I also hear you saying around, and I think this goes to a lot of our literacy conversations that we've had over the years too, is the preschool literacy piece, because I think that's something that we are also very much in tune to and want to do additional support, provide some additional capacity building in that space too, because the more that we're doing in K-3 and in elementary spaces and in our pre-K classrooms, the more that we can do in early childcare to get those students kindergarten ready for literacy as well is going to just continue to boost our literacy performance. And so I think that's a really great place here. I was kind of making that connection too as you were talking.
Let me help make further
I
connections.
know you would just amen that.
So as you, pose the question on, and I think about the theme of just where LDOE is going and the feedback from our educators, we have made such great strides. We know our literacy is just through the roof, but we also know that that's not everyone's story. And we know we are at a point where we're like, we have that foundation set and everyone's asking what's next. And that is the question that we're answering on the Literacy Commission in terms of what's next. This is, I think, a really good opportunity to write that next chapter, because while our typical students are soaring, you know, we're having that Matthew effect, right, where our students are with disabilities are just sort of leveling out, and they're not seeing the rate of growth the same way that our those non-disabled peers are. And I think the answer to that is teacher training, and not to train, to death our teachers, but they're asking for it. They don't know what to do. They're running their intervention groups for students, but they can only get them so far. So then when they do go through eval process and they are then turned over to the SPED department, they are asking what's next. There's not specialized training to support, especially in identified and evidence-based interventions, and how we're using them, those educators on the special education side and supports, they don't align with what our students need. So that's the only way we're going to close that gap and have that number increase and write the next chapter to have all those students have growth at the same rate. Maybe not at the same level, but at the same rate.
I think to go a level deeper, if you look at instructional strategies and then our educator development, we really need to develop our educators in instructional strategies. So they go, in. But then two, to focus on the data. Of course, we use that so much to drive our decisions as well, but we're looking at this band of, you're looking at 6 through 12, the reading component not being all that high, as well as the math. And you think about, okay, how do we develop our educators in those instructional strategies to better focus that middle school, high school band in the science of reading, because they were not included with that statewide training or that numeracy training. Our students with disabilities continue to need that support of learning how to read beyond fifth grade, but beyond elementary. They maybe don't catch on to those skills as quickly as others. So, waving the white flag and putting in accommodations, maybe of test read aloud or reading everything to them, not necessarily focuses on the problem of actually teaching them how to read. So if we give our teachers, our special educators, our regular classroom teachers, our interventionists, those tools to, in that middle school, high school band, just specifically looking at the data, maybe that would help grow those students as well, because those teachers have that information that they need and those tools that they need to actually teach them to continue those foundational skills. Maybe.
So I heard quite a few things that I'm really, really interested in. So intervention. I also agree that that's a very much next step of, when we talk about our the playbook and our best practice and the real strategy that's improving outcomes in our state. Practice 2 is about intervention and having extra time. Now we all agree, and I think we've been talking about this with our special education directors too for a long time, and CAOs and superintendents, is, okay, now we have that time by and large across our state. What's next? What's the quality? How do we make sure that intervention is truly providing those gap closing efforts that are connected to core? That's something we are very interested in focusing on for the next year. I also wrote down, when we talk about educator capacity and building the capacity of our educators, we have done a lot in our state to really try to, for the vast majority of our kids, to really blur that line between general education and special education, and what are the roles and responsibilities of everyone. These are all, our kids are all teachers' kids, all educators' kids. But I think about, and I hear you all saying, building capacity, and I start to think about certification and how is our special education certification and pathway model serving our kids. And so I know we would like all teachers to have competencies and skills around supporting kids with disabilities who are sitting in their classrooms all day, for a portion of the day, all of the day. We want them in that general education setting as much as possible. So how can we, I hear you all charging us to think about and maybe start looking into how do we make sure that educators coming out of prep provider programs or grow your own programs in our school systems who have the same requirements, if they operate those, to make sure that all educators know and understand how to support kids with disabilities in their classrooms. And so, something that, again, we're not afraid here in Louisiana to look at things that other people aren't doing, probably not something that across the country people are thinking about or thinking about looking at, but I think it's worth something for us to look at and say, how do we make sure every educator comes out and at least has some skills to support mild to moderate students who are sitting in regular education, general education classroom settings. Rebecca's smiling. She's a phenomenal teacher, I know.
Well, as a middle school teacher in the inclusion setting, I think that one of our biggest hurdles is just that developmentally at that age, socially, they don't want to be identified as different. They want to blend. And so while we have highly qualified teachers, who can collect data for you, implementing it is hard for a student that doesn't want to be um, labeled, or they don't want to have, read aloud. They don't want anybody to know they have read aloud. How do you mask that in a classroom setting? How do you make it look, the same for everyone? And so I do think that intervention time is important, extremely important to target, getting that time built into the day, because sometimes in a classroom, you'll pull a small table, pull a small group, and they will refuse to come. They do not want to be pulled out. So it's, the elementary kids love it. They all want to go.
Right?
So it's just a different stage in their life, and it's hard for those kids.
Well, I'd like to also throw out there too the playbook that we've talked so much about, and I think that it really helps us in alleviating some of these gaps too, just in the social component for our students with disabilities, because it's a mindset change that our whole state is having to go through at this point of, okay, well, that's a kid with an IEP, so they're going to go over there, and that's a kid that doesn't have an IEP, so they're going to go over here. But in reality, at some point, all kids can have problems with skills and mastering those skills. So being able to group them together, if we need to, as long as we're addressing the need, being able to address the skill deficit, no matter if they have an IEP or not. And I really think that the playbook has helped us to open that door to better look at those ideas and options instead of it being so closed off. So I'm hopeful as this gains more traction, the playbook gains more traction throughout the state, that we will see these scores, going in the right direction, and our mindsets opening up to, I guess, the realization that all kids need assistance at some point or another, and not just dismiss the option or the possibility of educating our kids together at the same table, no matter if they have a plan or not.
Rebecca, something that you said really sticks with me about the language that you use. What you say, your words matter. And one of the things that we talked a lot about last week, some of our highest attended sessions last week at Summit, two things. One was writing IEPs that best support kids and their individual needs. The other one was around, what does effective intervention look like? And one of the things that you said about kids and how they view themselves, it really matters. And when you think about middle and high school students, and we are asking high schools to not look over kids when we talk about elementary or early literacy, we have to have plans for kids in middle and high school who are also 2 to 3 years behind and are still struggling. They haven't had that, we're doing so much in the early years, but we've got kids that maybe haven't had that experience just yet, need some additional support. And the language that we use matters, because we're asking high schools to look at strategic scheduling, to look at intervention and starting intervention for those kids in 9th and 10th grade what you call that class and the language that you use matters, right? Call it a math lab, call it something that's engaging, something that they don't feel like it's another, I got to go to the thing again that I'm not the best at. But I mean, that really spoke to me, Rebecca, about what you said about the language and how we talk to kids, the older, the middle and the high school kid, and so that's kind of the terminology that we talked about last week with educators was, in high school, don't call it, I mean, we would like to, in our common language, really get away from that whole remedial and remediation language. We don't talk in that language here, but talk about it in that accelerated language. This is a math lab class. This is an English writing lab, or this is an ELA lab. And what we call it matters. How we speak to these kids and how we engage them around the area that they struggle the most in really does matter. That really speaks to me. I love that. Anything else? Y'all, I got a list.
I was going to say, I definitely agree. The language that you use in the classroom matters, and it can also help with behavior issues as well, like changing that behavior and, well, changing that language in the class could help with behavior issues as well.
Christine, you mentioned that teachers just need some awareness and training around just good instructional strategies. And to your point of supporting targeted areas for that middle and high school, where we're going to find the reality and their knowledge of good instructional strategies and meeting the students where they are, sometimes 7 grade levels below, they aren't equipped to teach reading.
Right.
They're equipped to intervene at the grade level, to provide that extended learning. So we really have to look at how we meet those students in pull out. There's no way we can teach reading in a whole class setting. And even at a pull out at the back table, not every kid is like my kid that's like, Mom, it's okay. I tell everybody I have dyslexia. It's fine. He's shouting it from the rooftop. He wants to be a poster child for it.
Right.
But there is a social emotional component that we can't ignore when we think about how intervention looks like. But regardless of where they go, they need to be met with fully equipped educators. And I think our pull out specialists are the ones to be best suited for that additional training to support them, because our classroom teachers, they don't have, it's not about capacity, it's about function. And that's their function shouldn't be to teach at the students' frustration level and their lowest level of performance. It's going to be that additional support. And what that looks like has to be specialized and targeted to meet them where they are.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so that's going to lead us to, I think, to our next steps. Oh, I'm sorry, public comments? Okay. That's going to lead us to our next steps.
All right, so I just wanted to kind of close us out with a couple of announcements, and then if there are any others, Dejanay, any other educator opportunities that I know we have coming up too in terms of conferences, dyslexia conference, feel free. And I know Ashley is not here. We do have our first, at least that I know of, Special Education Parent Summit coming up. The ARC is hosting that for us with our support. There will be a lot of agencies there to support parents. We have great registration numbers going and want to see more. And so please feel free to share this. It will be a day-long session at Lod Cook, really great facility. We will have department staff there doing presentations. They will have keynote staff. You'll have parents will have sessions to choose from. I have the registration link here if you want to choose this. I know that our educators also love to come to things that we do, but we really want to focus this day on our parents and provide them some really great support. We spent a week last week, 3 days last week with 7,000 educators, special education directors this year, So we're asking y'all, please share this with your parents and with families. We want to give them a wonderful day of support. Chastity, our special education ombudsman, will be there. And we're just really excited to spend a day with them. If we get really great feedback, this is something that we would like to do annually for parents. And we're just really excited. So help us get the word out. We have several hundred registered now, which is incredible. But we would like to get even more. I mean, I like to get, thousands. We probably can't house that in Log Cook, but we really want to get them there, and support them. So please help us share this information. Where's my clicker? Trying to think anything else. We'll have, of course, guidance coming out, a lot of things that we've talked about today. We'll have additional supports coming out for the behavior de-escalation, all those things connected to seclusion and restraint. We want ready to go in the fall for beginning of the school year. And I'll pause here. Dejanay, did you have something for the dyslexia conference or anything that you wanted to announce as well?
Yeah, we have, so here in Baton Rouge, it's in October. October is Dyslexia Awareness Month. So October 2nd and 3rd is the Plain Talk About Dyslexia Summit. And that's for educators. Parents are welcome to come and engage in that as well. But also for any district leaders around the table, there is a series of dyslexia awareness trainings happening around the state. Actually kicks off tomorrow in West Baton Rouge and going to a number of regions. That information is put out by the Literacy Division, and I can share that with anyone who is interested. And we have, there is a virtual session that says, like beyond the screening, what's next for the instruction, which has over several hundred registrants so far. So we know that that's an area that is highly coveted in terms of writing the next chapter.
Great. Thank you so much, Dejanay. New parent handbooks for special education posted. We also have them translated. If you go to the parent special education parent resource page on our website, it's very easy to find. There's one link on the dispute resolution page that I found this week. It must be a different link. We'll get that one updated as well. But the ones on the special education parent resource page are correct. We'll start communicating that to our special education directors as well, so they can start using those in upcoming IEP meetings. But I certainly wanted to announce that here. Now, we will also have to revise it and add some of the pieces from seclusion and restraint. But that shouldn't take us too long, shouldn't be a huge revision, but we'll add that, retranslate. It might take us a little bit. That's usually the most time-consuming component, and then we'll repost. But the ones that are there are the latest and good to start using based on all of the changes from last year. And y'all, I just want to close out by telling you thank you. This is probably one of my most favorite meetings as well, Dejanay, and I cannot tell you just how much more motivated that we are as a division, as an agency, to keep going and to keep doing this work each and every day alongside you. I want to thank you for your commitment to this panel. And for coming here and showing up. I mean, we were one person from quorum, and I know it's summer, but y'all have been amazing all year. Every single meeting, you show up, you do the work, we do the business, and you're changing lives, and you're making our state better for it. And so I appreciate y'all. Enjoy what's left of the summer, if we feel like there is one anymore. I appreciate y'all, and be safe.
Move to adjourn.
Hey, Meredith, before we adjourn real quick, can I make an announcement?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay,
Liam.
so hi, everyone. I'm
We
Liam
do
Murphy,
have the
Government
conference. Yes.
So our annual conference is coming up in it's next month. It's July 22nd to 23rd. It's in the Louisiana Purchase Room here in the Claiborne, and we have an entire morning segment of, I believe, day one is dedicated to education. So LGOE will be there. They're presenting on educator. There's going to be a couple different options for y'all to engage with. So we would welcome all of you. And Meredith, I'll share you the information if you could pass that along to your group.
Absolutely.
We would love to have everyone there. So mark your calendars for that. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Liam. It's going to be a great event too.